who's going to guide us through this conversation. Thank you so much for making time for us, Advocate Wessels. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement, and good morning to the listeners. Thank you once again for the opportunity to be a part of your program.
Let's start by explaining this Amendment Act. What does it aim to achieve, and why is it so significant?
Yeah, so the Employment Equity Amendment Act is significant for a variety of reasons. Number one, I think, is the key thing that we kind of seem to have forgotten about amidst the court battles between the DA and the ANC, is that it introduces a new definition for who is considered to be a designated employer. Historically, what we've seen prior to the amendment is that employers had to comply with the Employment Equity Act if they either employed more than 50 employees or if they employed less than 50 employees and they then exceeded certain thresholds, turnover thresholds that was established by the legislation. What the Amendment Act now does is it says, listen, we understand the burden of these kinds of legislation on small employers. So gone is the definition, and as we knew it, and now it's only applicable to employers who employ 50 or more employees. And then there's obviously a whole bunch of stricter enforcement mechanisms and the very controversial sector-specific numerical targets that have been introduced by the amendment.
Yeah. And please explain that, Advocate Wessels, because are those targets or are they quotas? Because that's part of why the DA has decided to go to court. One of the things that they said they were concerned about was that if you're in an area like, let's say, KwaZulu-Natal or in the Western Cape, where you've got more colored people or people of Indian descent in KwaZulu-Natal, it would be impractical to expect the businesses in those areas or in those provinces to actually comply with the national targets, so to speak, if that somehow disadvantages a particular group of people in the province. How do you understand this legislation to shape up in as far as that concern is concerned?
Yeah, so it's, I think a lot of it's going to boil down to how we read the legislation, how we interpret it. The big controversy behind these sectorial targets is, I think, the fact that it states employers must achieve them by the end of their 5-year period. So where employers historically had a 12-month plan that they did every year, the new amendments effectively make provision for a 5-year plan, and that will run from the 1st of September 2025 until the 31st of August 2050. So this word must then tells us that if we do not achieve these targets, what are going to be the consequences? And effectively, what has always been the case is that where there is non-compliance, a fine could be imposed ranging anything from 1.5 million rand or 2% of the company's annual turnover up to 2.7 million or 10% of turnover if it's a repeat offender. So this is a substantial amount of money that can businesses are going to risk paying if they do not comply. And I think the reality that we sit with is that in 30 years of democracy, when we've had employment equity legislation with us since 1996, if my memory serves me correct, we've gave employers an opportunity to transform the workplace. And yes, to a large extent, we have seen a lot of success stories from a transformation perspective. We've got people that are in a very wealthy class. We've got a substantial middle class in South Africa of various designated groups. But I think there's still a sense that transformation or equity in the workplace is not happening fast enough. And hence now these targets have been set. Because every year prior to these amendments, employers had the ability to set their own goals to achieve. And if they were if they were not able to achieve them, then they simply had to provide reasons why they did not.
Yeah, and isn't that what is more helpful with the amendment now? Because these are flexible employment equity targets, so they're not as rigid as your mandatory quotas. Employers can set their annual numerical targets in their employment equity plans, which must then comply with the sectoral targets. But what makes it flexible is that employers can also justify their failure to meet the targets, and obviously that's got to be on reasonable grounds. But doesn't that provide room for employers as well to be part of the solution? Because, as you said, Advocate Wessels, we've seen it over the years. Companies have really not taken the initiative, many of them, to just push for transformation, even when there's legislation. And which is why now you've got the Labour Minister saying, I need to find ways where I can force these companies to transform. If you're not going to force them, we've seen over the last 30 years, they're not going to do it.
Yeah, and but it's the manner in which we go about doing that. Yes, I agree with you that there has to be some more pressure set on employers across the different industries and sectors. The only concern that a lot of people have, and I've read many an article about it, is there seems to be this illusion amongst employers that in order for you to achieve your sectorial targets at the end of this 5-year period, you may now have to retrench your workforce, get rid of people that, are just hanging around and not close to retirement so that you can achieve these targets. If everybody calms down and looks at the legislation, we see the minister, and this is also to a large extent in line with the agreement that government entered into with Solidarity, that there are various reasons you can still provide to the Department of Employment and Labour to justify why you could not achieve the targets. If I'm very fortunate at Strata-g that my team of dedicated professionals, which is across all designated groups, not one of them decides to resign. I have insufficient recruitment opportunities. I'm not replacing anybody. There's no natural attrition. So how am I going to achieve those targets? And I think that's where the uncertainty lies, is to say, but there are so many factors at play. Are we going to be risking this penalty or these penalties that the legislation imposes? Interestingly enough, the settlement agreement between government and Solidarity seems to imply that employers will not be penalized if they fail to achieve these sectorial targets, but they are able to justify why.
Yeah, but that must still be on reasonable grounds. It's 17 minutes now after 11 o'clock. We're going to take a quick ad break. When we come back, I'd like to go to your calls on 011-883-0702 or your WhatsApps on 072-702-1702. What question do you have around this Employment Equity Amendment Act and how that would change the face of our labor market should the DA win or lose this case? Or maybe you've got some inputs as well to share with us around transformation in the workplace. I'll start with those after the break.
John Perlman. Weekday afternoons,
3 to 6.
64 public schools across South Africa do not offer learners the option of studying mathematics.
In trying to get more learners to pass, but also pressure applied to schools and districts and, of course, provincial departments. And so people have become creative, trying to moving children away from the more difficult to pass subjects to the easier to pass
Right.
subject, and that is a tragedy.
Basil Manuel, Executive Director of the trade union NAPTOSA.
John Perlman.
3 to 6 on 702.
Just in, a 38-year-old man named Tabang is a real OUTsurance client who switched and now saves an unbelievable 363 Rand a month on his 2018 Toyota Corolla 1.6. That's 363 Rand more money in his pocket every month. OUTsurance clients always get something out. Get a quote today and see how much they could save you on your car insurance. Make today the day you switch and save with OUTsurance. Call 08600 60,000 or visit outsurance.co.za. You always get something out. A licensed insurance FSP. T's and C's online.
Daydreaming about that next holiday? Stop dreaming. Flight Center's Big Red Sale is back, bringing you the hottest deals. Save up to 50% off selected cruise and tour deals, 65% off stays, 55% off holiday packages, and save even more with our Bundle Plus Save offering. Hurry, sale ends 31 May. Visit flightcenter.co.za or your nearest Flight Center store. T's and C's apply. Flight Center, your center for travel. Early mornings, back-to-back meetings, a calendar that's side-eyeing you like it's personal. Still, you show up, and so does your M-Zoom R-Style. Because unlike that one colleague, it actually pulls its weight. And smooth, like it just slid in your DMs. And right now, you're doing it for just 439,900 rands. Extended by popular demand. Get the R-Style for the price of the executive. Don't sleep on it. You blink, and it's gone, like that girl that said, I'll let you know. www.gacmotorza.co.za.
702. World of Work.
20 minutes after 11 o'clock on our World of Work feature this morning, we are discussing the Employment Equity Amendment Act. The long-awaited regulations have now officially come into effect, and we are looking at really what could be the consequences if this DA court case against the Department of Labor, how is this going to affect the implementation of employment equity in the workplace, whether they win or they lose this court case? Let's start with your WhatsApp voice notes on 072 702 1702. All right, something seems to be wrong there with that WhatsApp voice note. We'll come to it in a moment. Let me continue the chat in the meantime while we sort that out with Advocate Tertius Wessels, who's the Managing Director at Strata-g Labor Solutions. Advocate Wessels, I've got a message here from someone who was asking about the risks for companies that genuinely try to comply but still fall short. Could they really be fined this 10% of turnover? And I suppose the concern here, if I may add to the question, is that, previously the worry from government was that, companies sometimes do budget for a fine, so to speak. So how do we get companies to really become part of the solution? Because also, do we even have enough inspectors from the Labor Department who can go and make sure that companies comply with the legislation?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So let's start with the Department of Employment and Labor itself. I think for the longest period of time, we have come to witness various blitz inspections or programs being launched by the Department of Employment and Labor in order to try and enforce compliance, be it through health and safety, basic conditions of Employment Act, etc. So yes, there is activity happening, but the manpower is not there. There is too many employers and too little inspectors. And remember, the department is very much reliant upon employers reporting that they have more than 50 employees. Because once they submit those employment equity reports, there is a possibility that some of them might drop below 50 going in the next couple of months. and which means they do not have to comply with these amendments. And one then has to ask, are employers, the next time they recruit 3 or 4 people again, are they going to just voluntarily register again, or are they going to find creative solutions to kind of fly under the radar? And it's that kind of behavior at the end of the day that really frustrates everything, because we implement legislation for specific reasons. I've never heard of anybody complain of diversity and inclusion and the benefits it has for organizations. What I have heard, is that a lot of businesses simply struggle to afford all these compliances. If the business is struggling and you're not making profit, the last thing you are focused on is paying compliance-related issues. You are simply trying to survive. And I think that's a real struggle for many, many businesses, is that even though they might want to comply, they simply can't. I would love to employ, let's say, for example, a colored female within one of my teams, but unfortunately I can't find them. I can't find one in Limpopo where my business is operated. So to get somebody from the Cape to apply, I'd have to offer a much bigger salary, which I might not be able to afford. So there's a lot of factors at play, and I think there'll always be that small group of employers that kind of try and avoid the law, if I can put it that way, and they make it difficult for everybody else. But there are many that have good intentions at the end of the day, and it's simply that they're struggling as small businesses to comply.
Speaking of small businesses, I've got some text messages here that I want to read, and I'll get your thoughts. Shafiq says, hi, Clement and your guest. With regard to the amendments to the Employment Equity Act, we can have intellectual debates about whether or not the amendments are necessary for redress or not. However, the most important question is whether or not the amendments will attract or repeal investment. Should businesses feel that they are counterproductive, how would unemployment be resolved? Why would businesses employ more than 50 people? Would it really have the desired effect? That's one message there on the WhatsApp text. Another one says, hi, Clement. 99% of the meetings I'm the only woman, the only black person, and most times I'm both. That's not a coincidence. That's a reflection of a system that's still very much white and male-dominated. The reality is there hasn't been a strong enough nudge or even a proper push to change that. Transformation has become a tick box exercise instead of a real intentional shift. It's not about filling quotas. It's about opening doors, making space, and creating environments where black women like me aren't the exception, but part of the norm. We need to stop pretending like diversity just happens naturally. It doesn't. It takes effort, accountability, and willingness to challenge the status quo, and that's the part we're still avoiding. I couldn't have agreed more with you, Khusiami, there on the WhatsApp line. Advocate Vessels, your reflections?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with facts. The previous Employment Equity Act gave companies the ability to voluntarily develop and achieve their employment equity plans. And if I had to give that same kind of voluntary compliance to many South Africans to go pay your TV license, we see what's happening at the SABC as a result of that. So sometimes more drastic measures are necessary, and it is, and it will probably for the next for the foreseeable future, you'll still have a situation where white males, which I think make up 8% of our population, would still govern 60% of companies in South Africa. And the question is not necessarily because of the color of the person's skin. I think what we failed in this drive for equity in the workplace is to also focus on upskilling our employees and upskilling those that do not necessarily have the ability to go and study at university, etc. Because a lot of the times when it comes to promoting people or appointing people in organizations, it goes back to, for the most part, does the person have the requisite skills, knowledge, and experience? And yes, how can we expect people to get skills and experience if we're not going to give it to them? But then bring about initiatives like the YES initiative from a BEE perspective. We've seen internships, learnerships yield a lot of results for organizations. But it's going to take time for people to come through the doors, come into organizations that have the requisite skill sets to take on those positions. I don't want to be put in a position where I'm tasked to be CEO of a pharmaceutical company and I know nothing about medicine or the pharmacy trade just because of the color of my skin. It would be a disservice for myself, the company, as well as all the employees and their families that rely on that company's success for their livelihoods.
Absolutely, and thank goodness the Employment Equity Act, even this employment equity legislation, they still emphasize on merit. So you must still get suitably qualified candidates and not just pick someone because they're a woman or pick someone because they have disability or because they're black. Advocate Statius Wessels, thank you so much for guiding us through this chat. He's the Managing Director at Strata-g Labor Solutions. That takes us to 11:30. Let's get the latest.